Hello, ladies and gentlemen at the line. Today, I'm very pleased to have David Perlich, who is a dear friend of mine, but also much more importantly, a CBC producer and basically their in-house Vatican analyst. He has covered now 3 conclaves. He just got back from Rome to cover the election of Pope Leo. We're here to talk about conclave politics. We're here to talk about how conclaves work. We're here to talk about his personal story into how he got into covering the Vatican from, his humble beginnings as a Southern Alberta farm boy. And of course, we talk about the geopolitical implications of an American Pope. It's actually a really great conversation and very enjoyable. I really hope you'll stick with it. That's today on the Line with me, your host, Jen Gerson.
This episode of On the Line is brought to you by Innovative Medicines Canada. With a new government in place, one thing remains clear. Canada must continue to prioritize patients and healthcare innovation. Innovative Medicines Canada is focused on collaborating with all levels of government to improve access to life-saving medicines and develop a healthcare system that prioritizes patients, ignites innovation, and drives economic growth. Canada's innovative medicines sector plays a critical role, not just in health outcomes, but in keeping us competitive on the global stage. That's why, even during a moment of political change, Innovative Medicines Canada is staying focused on the issues that matter most to Canadians. And as Canada moves forward with national pharmacare, Innovative Medicines Canada believes it's possible to expand access without limiting choice by strengthening what works and fixing what doesn't. Visit innovativemedicines.ca to learn more.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen of On the Line. I have with me here one of my favoriteest people in the entire world, David Perlich. How do I even begin to introduce you to my guest? You and I, firstly, I'd say you and I go way back.
Drinking buddies? We go way back.
Drinking buddies, way back. I remember when I first rage quit the National Post, you contacted me the next day and was like, come write for me. And I was like, who are you? But okay, that's great. And you and I have been...
A beautiful friendship was born. Yes.
A beautiful friendship was born in that very moment. So, look, I know you and I go way back as a producer at the CBC. Yeah. However, you kind of have a bit of a second job, and your second job was extraordinarily useful to you in the last few weeks because you are a Vatican analyst as well.
Yeah, that's my bizarre side hustle that comes in handy every 12 years.
Every 12 years, it comes in handy. And you just got back from Rome where you were covering conclave for the CBC.
Yes. And I've got a little bit of a cold, so if anybody wonders, and I was thinking before we started this, you and me talking about religion and politics and power and me on cough syrup, what could possibly go wrong in this conversation?
This is basically the basis of our friendship. I mean, like, what is even the problem here? This is a Friday night at the bar for us. Okay, so firstly, how are you feeling? You literally just got back from Rome a couple of days ago. I think that you're still jet lagged. You're still exhausted. So we really appreciate you coming on to chat with us.
Happy to.
Okay. Cool. Awesome. Okay, so let's just start with the overview. Firstly, how many conclaves have you covered now?
3 conclaves.
3 conclaves. Okay, cool. And how did this conclave compare to your previous ones?
I had a bigger journalistic role, and I felt like I was... I knew, yes, what I was doing more. Mm-hmm. The first time I went into one, which was 2005 when Pope John Paul II died, I had already been working on Vatican-related material and whatever, but it is... There's a reason I'm an analyst and not an expert. This is a 2,000-year-old transnational institution. So I don't think you can be an expert. I think you just do your best. And when I went into the conclave, I knew what was supposed to happen, but seeing it and being part of it and the pacing and the timing and all the ritual and trying to figure out how the ebb and the flow of that. This time I felt like I had a really a good handle on it myself personally. It was different in that, just as an organic experience, in that the 2005, John Paul II was such a massive global figure. and there was such a profundity to people's, I think, the personal relationship they felt with him, that when he died, the estimate is that 4 million people came to Rome for that funeral, which is roughly the population of Rome. This was a much smaller, and was expected to be, but small, when only 400,000 people show up, but you get what I'm saying. Like it was a different on a scale of magnitude. But it was still, you just know you're watching history happen, right? So it's still amazing to be there.
Do you have a favorite pope of any of the conclaves you covered?
Oh, see, of the ones, there are certain, I get in trouble when I talk about this, right? Because if you have a favorite pope, it's like you're not supportive of, not that I'm, anyway, there's certain characteristics about popes that I like. So I loved the fact that John Paul II could go back to Poland and literally make communist officials shake. It's on camera. You can watch it on YouTube.
Wow.
I love that John the 23rd, who was well before my time, used to play jokes on Vatican gardeners and was like a Pope John Paul the First. I think I was 9 in 1978, was such a smiley, happy man, and that was an interesting to watch. Francis was just wow, in the sense that, like, whether you're Catholic or not, whether you believe or not, and I'm not a believer. I wish I was most days, but I'm not. Just watching what he could do, and what he could say globally, and how that would spark conversations was amazing. Benedict was interesting in where he wanted to take the papacy and how he acted on it. So they're all like, every one of them has something like unique or different, and that's kind of what makes this work interesting. It's like in this country, getting a new prime minister and trying to figure out who they are. What you always want to know is, what's the story and what are they going to do, right? So that's the big thing here. And of course, like, just on a personal level, I'll keep it a secret. There are popes that I've enjoyed sort of reading their stuff and covering more. So.
Interesting. So, okay, so you are kind of a non-believer. You're not a Catholic. I was raised a Catholic, and as someone who was raised a Catholic, I'm super into interpersonal politics because that is just unavoidable. And I can't imagine what an absolutely delightful pressure cooker a conclave must be. Can you just give us a quick overview? I know people will generally have an overview of this, but for anybody who doesn't, what is a conclave and what is that experience for the people who are in it?
Sure. I'll just roll back the tape for half a second, Jen, before we go on. I may not believe, but I was raised a Catholic.
Okay. Fair enough.
I like my father's people, I think, were Catholic right around when St. Peter took the boat over to Italy.
Sure.
I'm a cultural Catholic, so I'm steeped in the tradition. I was a very good altar boy, knew when to ring the bells. But there's a difference between being culturally Catholic and going every prayer, I believe every word, right? So
yeah, and I want to get into that because I do want to talk about Catholicism and politics in the Canadian context, because I think there's a whole misunderstanding among non-believers about the difference between being culturally Catholic and super Catholic and ultra Catholic and trad Catholic and all the rest.
The whole spectrum. Anyway, so
the whole spectrum. Conclave. Take us through what a conclave is exactly.
A conclave is the when a pope has died, or in the case of Benedict, stepped down, it is the election of the successor of St. Peter, is the belief in the church. So it's not just any old election, you're electing a direct successor to St. Peter. Not necessarily in the theology a successor to the man that came before him, although that's in the practical sense, that's what you're doing. So this is every cardinal in the world is summoned to Rome. There are 200 and change, but only the cardinals under the age of 80 are allowed to vote.
Mm-hmm. So, and why is that?
It was originally put in, I want to say it was Paul VI who made that change, so it's relatively recent. I think in my reading, frankly, it was to sort of limit the influence of sort of a gerontocracy, like of the really elderly people, to allow a sort of fresh ideas, fresh belief into the voting process.
The world advances one funeral at a time, as they say.
Yep, it's been said, and I certainly think there's truth. Although surprisingly, a lot of the stuff that we heard in this conclave was cardinals in their 90s who were really expounding the sort of Francis vision for the church. So I found that particularly, like, you're 94 years old and you're banging on about diversity, inclusion, and being open to the world. Like that's
interesting. That's a shift. Well, we're going to get into Vatican politics as well, but firstly, just take us through. So what happens? So firstly, like, can you just explain to me really quickly, what is a cardinal? What is a cardinal exactly?
Cardinal comes from the Latin cardus, meaning hinge. It is literally, the Vatican Church has hierarchies. What a surprise, right? And it has pretty much the beginning. These are men, all men, who are chosen by the Pope to become what you would consider his closest advisors and or representatives around the world. So there are cardinals across the globe, and Francis placed them in places where we don't traditionally have cardinals. So he really these are his closest advisors and people that sort of like keep an eye on the church, but also bring the vision globally of these different countries and cultures back to the Vatican, because this is a transnational institution, right? So these guys,
it's almost like a diplomacy post.
Yeah, you have some extraordinary powers, but you're also not like the boss. Like it's not like the cardinal in Toronto literally goes, this is how it's going to be across Canada. That's not the role. It's more an advisor role, right? So these people are still bishops, or they're still archbishops within their respective dioceses, but then they're just like bishops plus. Yeah, yes, there are some who are not bishops, although they become whatever. That's down the. Trust me when I tell you, there's a wormhole here. But basically, it's not like you're an archbishop and then you're a cardinal. It would be like a cardinal is like an additional title you would get on your existing hierarchical role. Yes.
Okay.
And so it's you have illustrated some kind of significant intellectual or spiritual acumen, and the Vatican, the both the government and the Pope as an individual have decided that your input would be valuable, or that representation from your part of the world is necessary.
Interesting.
So these guys have a really, and it's not an equal role. Like some cardinals only work in the curial government, the official government in Vatican City. Some cardinals are more pastoral and they work in particular cities. Bologna, their cardinal's very, very popular, and he rides bike around town. Other cardinals are a little more, what would you say, formal and stately. I've met many. And so everyone has a different role, and there's no sort of, this is the cardinal rule book, please follow it. It's right. Different for everyone.
So how many cardinals were there in this election again?
133 voting cardinals, because two cardinals were unable to come. There were 135 electors, but they were unable to come due to ill health. So there were 133 cardinals who processed into the Sistine Chapel in their choir dress, as they call it, that very formal dress, and were able to vote.
So just so that people who don't understand this process, these guys are sequestered. They are locked in, and they cannot leave their living quarters or eating quarters or the Sistine Chapel until they elect a pope.
Yeah, it's like it's like being locked in inside of an already locked in area. So let me get to that. So first, what happens is, let's say in this case, Pope Francis dies. All the cardinals around the world are summoned to Rome. They arrive at different times. A lot of them live in Rome, so they're already, but they begin a process called general congregations. And what that means is, because there's no pope, they declare something called sede vacante, which literally means empty chair, because it's the chair of St. Peter that gives you the authority of the church. It's sort of a, it used to be called an interregnum between kings, right? But it's sede vacante. And then two officials in the Vatican sort of take over the absolutely necessary day-to-day operations, but they're not in charge of the church. They just basically making sure the lights stay on and the bills get paid. That's their kind of their role, the camerlenha. And there's and then somebody starts working on the funeral and how the conclave will be run. So every day these men, all cardinals, not just the voting ones, get into a big it looks like a university lecture hall actually, and they have conversations. And these can run really long.
Yeah.
And you're allowed to put in a request to speak as a cardinal. So what's called an intervento. So you get about 5 minutes, although we hear a lot of them didn't stick to that. And you can stand up and say, this is where I think the world is. This is where I think the church is. This is where I think we need to go. So although there are no political parties, there's no formal allegiances. There's no official candidates in this process, none. The number one way to not become pope is to look too greedy to become pope. So it's all done with what they call romanità, this sort of like very gentle, quiet sophistication and sort of grace. But we do know from Pope Francis's autobiography that he made an interventio of only about 3 minutes, and he said he knew he was sunk, in the sense that he knew that he had placed himself on the list of papabile, people who could maybe be pope, with his intervention, just on his vision for the church.
Well, what did he say in his intervention? Do we know?
Well, we only know what he told us, because they're all supposed to be secret. And if you ask cardinals, and people did on the street in this last conclave, what'd you talk about today? And they're like, no, right? But they give a general idea, right? Like, oh, we talked about the geopolitical situation, Francis talked about the necessary for a church to stand open to the world, a church to be as open as possible, and to engage on the peripheries and the margins of the world, and become inclusive in that sort of way. So that's pretty much all that we really know. So
Pope Leo got up and said, you know what, I just think we should be open to the world. And people were so impressed by that, they were like, yeah, that's getting my first vote.
Pope Francis, not Pope. No, Pope Leo.
Sorry. Okay. Sorry. I apologize. Pope Francis.
Don't like how many popes now? Yeah. Don't worry about it. So they have these meetings every day. You can make an intervention if you want or not. And then they go into what's called a conclave process. So I'll get to that. So Vatican City is this like tiny little independent country inside Rome. It is not big. You can walk across it, although they don't allow you to. And the cardinals all stay in something that looks like, I swear to God, a motel in New Mexico from like 1987. It's called Casa St. Marta. It's kind of like a little hotel in Vatican City, and it's where officials come and stay when they're visiting Rome. But they shoo everyone out, and they make sure there's enough rooms, and then the cardinal electors are all in this area. So in that sense, the people that work with them, like the cleaners and the people that are feeding them and the security and everything, they take an oath of secrecy that they will never say what's gone on in that building or in the vicinity. So they're all kind of behind the walls of St. Peter's Basilica. You have to imagine sort of like there's an area that you just do not go into. But there's a lot. But
there's no way everybody actually stays quiet. Like, stuff gets out.
Oh, occasionally, but I mean, this is like.
I mean, these are Catholics here. I mean, come on.
What do you mean? People talk, but they talk at the risk of their job and the risk of their reputation, right? So, yeah, maybe somebody says something to a journalist, and we had a couple cases of that, like where you go, is that well sourced? Yeah, probably. This guy maybe knows somebody on the inside. But in general, it's. Like, seriously, it's not like secular politics. They're pretty good about this. So that's the sort of one area when you think about it, where they're in Casa St. Marta, where they stay, where they eat, where they sleep. And then every day they walk over, or bus, if they're not healthy enough to walk, over to the Sistine Chapel. They have to go up some stairs, and they go into the Sistine. And then on the first day is the one that we all see on TV, right? They are locked. They are the somebody who's in charge of the liturgical process, which is basically the formality and the ritual of how this works. Everybody processes in while they're singing this beautiful hymn. And then the words are uttered extra omnes, which literally means everybody out. And that's when, for the first few minutes, there are a couple assistants and guys in charge of this liturgical celebrations that are like, okay, you stand here, you stand there. This is how the process. Did anybody have any questions? And they all have the sort of like a book on conclave on their desks that they can refer to if they have questions. And then those people leave, and it is only the 133 electors in that room, and they don't talk. That's the interesting part, is they sit there.
The only time a group of Catholics will ever get together and not talk. This is the one time.
Little old men from, around the world. And then one by one, I mean, there's much more to this process, but, one by one, they walk up, because they've all made promises to vote, and they've taken secrecy oaths that they won't, talk about what goes on or how many people voted for who on which ballot. All of that is the secrecy of this part of this. And then one by one, in silence, they go up and they cast a secret ballot. And those ballots then are counted very, very publicly. And there's 3 people that do the counting, and there's a process and ritual around that so that it's all fair and that everybody knows, who's doing, who's got what. And then they read the names out loud, and every cardinal has a little piece of paper and a pencil so he can take notes. So they all make sure the numbers are right. And then they read out the final numbers for each candidate. You have to hit a 2/3 majority. So in this case, it was 89 votes.
So you're saying this is very different from secular politics, but, politics are politics. You can't tell me that, for example, people don't take into account, for example, who's gaining momentum between votes, or what conversations are happening at the lunch table, or that factions don't arise within these groups of people that influence the movement of momentum from one individual to another.
So that's how it happens. So let's say, in order to be a pope, you want somebody who is scandal-free. You want somebody who is neither way too young or way too old. You want somebody who is not infirm, because it's troubling if you elect a pope and then you find out they have stage 3 cancer and they're only going to be there 6 months. You want somebody who can actually handle a huge bureaucracy, because the curial government, the church is big. You want somebody who's personable, that has that charisma that we've become so used to, I would argue, since John Paul II. There are all these sort of like elements that you'd like to, somebody who's like sound on church doctrine and church teaching, so nobody who's published something wackadoodle or ever got in trouble for saying something, that's out to lunch in the theological terms. So this, and somebody who's has more than one language, because you're pope to the whole world. You're not just pope to Rome or pope to whatever, right? And so that's a short list. Like, you take 133 men and like zing, 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 zing. So there's usually there are these lists called papabili. So while there's no official candidates, journalists, Vatican watchers, cardinals themselves, you kind of have an idea going in who could possibly make the list. And those lists run from everything that people that put out, like, here's the top 5 names, to, I saw a list, it was like 22. And I'm like, that's almost cheating. Like, that's like 20, not quite 20%, but it's a lot of people that you put on there. And people try to figure out who it might be. A lot of these cardinals we know arrived in Rome not knowing each other. It's not like there's a cardinal like secret WhatsApp group, right? Like, so if you're in like
there totally has to be a WhatsApp group, though.
Well, for a few,
at least one.
There's at least one that I know of for a few people that are in Rome. But anyway, but if you're in Burma and you're in Chile and you're in Germany and you're in where like Gabon, right? Where like wherever, pick a place, right? you are not going to know these other guys very well. So when they arrived, it's a chance to meet and greet. And during these general congregations, it was quite funny because they were really open with the media, and we would get these pictures of these and some video from inside these meetings before they sort of closed the doors to have private conversations. And they all had like these little name tags on it. It was like, "Hello, my name is, and I am from." And I'm like, "That's great."
That's adorable. Team building. Did they stack chairs and make a pyramid next? Like, it's perfect.
I don't think exactly. If I fall backwards, will you catch? No. So this was an opportunity for them to get to know each other. And it's in that process that over lunches, over dinner, in private conversations in hallways, people would be talking about possible candidates. Right? Like, oh, I've heard this about this cardinal. He seems really good. I'm really interested in him. What do you think? Right? And that's how these sort of very loose coalitions, so according to the theology, none of this sort of, they admit it happens, but it's not part of the, it's the Holy Spirit and each man voting his conscience, and, that it's informed by the Holy Spirit, his decision making. But of course, it's a very human, the conclaves, and
the Holy Spirit moves in all kinds of ways, man.
Does he ever? But this is one of the first times I heard them really go down hard on how this is a human process too, and that is lots of talking, right? Like, do you like this guy? How about this guy? Have you thought of this guy? Have you heard of him? Right? What do you know? And so that's how the votes sort of. This is what happens. Now, when you're in conclave in the actual voting process. So let's say on the first day, there's one ballot, and that ballot is normally, and all this is secret, all this is after the extra omnis, everyone get out, everything is sealed and locked with a key, and conclave, conclaves in the Latin, sealed in with a key, and you, the first ballot is sort of like what they call like, he's a good fellow kind of ballot, right? Oh, I like this guy. He's never going to be Pope, but I'm going to vote for, Catholic. It's sort of like to pay respects, to pay honor to people. And then they would all go back to the Casa St. Marta. So they leave that room where it's only them. And then they go back to Casa St. Marta, where there's other people who are also sworn to secrecy, but there's sort of support staff and assistants and whatnot. Although there's no cell phones allowed, there's no newspapers in, you are cut off from the world, you're in a bubble, even there. And they would talk over supper, right? What do you think? Okay, well, he got 32 votes, and, I think a lot of people like him, and I should pay attention to that. And that's when the really serious business on the first vote of the next morning, that's when they're getting down to, okay, right? And you start to, this is, the only reason we're not supposed to know about this process, although Francis decided to write about some of it in his autobiography, which is like, oh, okay.
And he was the Pope, so like, whatever, what could he do wrong? Once you're the Pope.
You
can argue with the Pope? Go for it.
We do know from diaries and journals and some letters and some things that have come out since like the mid 20th century, some of what goes on, right? So, and there's actually like one Vatican watcher he's had some really good stuff on the how Benedict got elected and then Francis. But then you start to see the voting pattern shift. So in the morning there's 2 votes, and in the afternoon there's 2 votes. And in this case, wow, was it fast. So they had the first afternoon, evening, and then 1, 2 votes the next morning. So that's vote 1, 2, 3, and then bang, on the 4th, they had their man.
David, I noticed that when you were on the air, I believe, as the white smoke was coming up from the chimney, and I don't think I need to explain to our listeners that, black smoke, no Pope, white smoke, yes Pope. When the white smoke, yes Pope came up, you were quite shocked when you found out who it was, because of course, Robert Prevost is an American, a cardinal from Chicago originally, worked in Peru, did missionary work in Peru. But he was, as per usual, he was nowhere near the top of most people's likely to be Pope lists. I don't think he was necessarily he was not off the list, but he was not, like, he was like 12th or 13th if you had a list that long kind of thing. And I think that's because it's a long-standing tradition that Americans aren't popes. They're not pope material. They're not popey. So your reaction was genuinely quite shocked. Can you take us back through that moment of your emotional response to that and immediately where your mind went when that was announced?
Wow, yeah. That's so we get the white smoke, and then the proto deacon comes out for the big moment, the Abemus Papam. Like, I announce you with great joy we have a pope. And then he actually says the name and says it in Latin, so you have to, like, what now? And I'll be
Roberto
honest,
Prevosto.
a little more complicated than that in this case.
Totally.
Prevost was a name that we had discussed, but I'll be honest, I had a list of about 7 or 8 that I thought were more likely, and I was wrong. He was on a few lists that I saw, but maybe 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And normally, I'll be honest, those were on American websites. So
Right.
I was kind of like, is that wish fulfillment? Because there was sometimes,
Yeah.
these, you're like, okay, well, I can see why you would like that guy and whatever. So yes, it was, I was quite shocked. The idea was always this, that America is so culturally, socially, politically, and economically and militarily dominant in the modern world. Okay, so this is like in modernity that we're talking about, not going back. That it would just be too much for them to also have the papacy. That was the
Right.
rule of thumb, and is it common wisdom? And of course, common wisdom was wrong in this case. So I was when I first thought, wow, it's an American, I was completely shocked. He did do, I think it was almost 30 years in Peru. So, and he was described as the least American of American cardinals, because there's quite a bunch of them. It makes, the more I learn about his background and what may have gone on in that conclave, it makes some sense to me, but it is still sort of like, wow, an American cardinal. So the Cardinals apparently decided, nope. Now, here's one of the problems. Everybody reads something into this. How would we know?
Well, I'm gonna put a pause in that right there, because we're gonna get into the political implications of all of this, and I do want to get into the stuff that you've started to eke out about why it was him. And also, I want to talk about your personal journey into Vatican reporting, because like you have a really interesting personal story on that one. This is not where a lot of secular journalists in Canada wind up. It's a really rare path, so it's a fascinating one. But first, I'm going to put a like and subscribe note there. I'm going to take a break to listen to our sponsors, and you do follow us afterwards, because I think there's just a whole bunch of skins to the onion to unpack here. So put a like and subscribe on the line, and check us out at www.readtheline.ca, and come back and see us after the break. So, David, I'm going to take our listeners back a few days now, to when we first met, because as I said, when I quit the Post, you were one of the first people to reach out to me to get me to write for you. I remember meeting you for the first time, probably at the CBC in Calgary.
Yep.
And like almost the first words that came out of your mouth was like, well, I'm an aggressively gay man here who's a producer at the CBC. Like, you were very frank about yourself and your situation in life. And I loved it. I was like, all right, I guess we're best friends now. That's cool by me. But
I think I probably just was aggressive. I'm not sure.
No. You were assertive and honest about it. It was fantastic. It suited my personality and temperament just fine. But tell me, how does someone who, like, you're a gay man, you're from Southern Alberta, farm stock, like I think you've lived in Alberta most, if not all of your life. You're wildly well-traveled. Very well educated. I mean, I think you were telling me that you did your master's thesis at Columbia on like the Vatican press corps. Mm-hmm. But how in the hell does like a gay farm boy from Southern Alberta wind up becoming a Vatican analyst? Like, how does that, take me through that process? What is that story?
All kind of by accident, to be honest. Yes, my complicated personality. You should get my boyfriend in here to talk with. So I grew up on a farm. My father was a cattle auctioneer just outside Lethbridge in southern Alberta. Um, I always knew I wanted to be a journalist. Like that goes back to when I was 11. So journalism was my thing, and I've been lucky enough to have that as my thing my whole life. Uh, the Somewhere around the age of, I was a very strange little boy, to quote my mother. Somewhere around the age of 17, I saw the movie The Mission. I don't know if anybody's seen it. A beautiful movie, Jeremy Irons. And it was about Jesuit missionaries in South America centuries ago, when the Spanish and the Portuguese were fighting. And it resonated in me at 17, like I can't even tell you. Even then, I wasn't, I'd sort of grown up Catholic, but fallen away from belief, trying not to let grandma know so there weren't problems in the family, But I saw this movie and thought, oh my God, like this is like, it touched something in the core of me. Saw it twice, again at 17. And decided I wanted to go to a Jesuit university, which I did, Gonzaga University, first in Spokane, Washington, and then in Florence, Italy. And decided that although I wanted to be a journalist, I also got a degree in Italian because I was going to be studying there. And I started, I took a minor in theology as well, and started to become interested less in the theology and more in the function, the instrumental aspect of the church, how it was organized, how it worked. It's an intersection of history, power, money, geography, like faith, belief, compassion, violence, power, war. Like there's everything, right? It's sort of and
it's the human condition really, really intensified in one institution.
Yes. But with an interest like that and a degree in Italian studies, it was sort of like, would you like to supersize that for 35 cents more? So secular journalism was obviously where I went. And I'm fascinated by political theory and political journalism. But I had a career at the CBC. I was lucky enough to start at the CBC. And also worked I was over in the Bosnian War, covering that conflict, and then lived in the Netherlands. But then I came back to Canada, got back at the CBC, and was sort of a producer. And but I think somehow word got around that I wasn't afraid of God talk, if you know what I mean. Like most say the word God in a newsroom, and it's like somebody farted, right? Everyone's uncomfortable, no one knows where to look.
And I want to unpack that a little bit, because I think that's an interesting problem. I think it is a really interesting problem with secular journalism. But first, problem. I want to. It's a big problem. Yeah. But first, I want to. So you went to Jesuit University, very unusual path, very unusual path for a secular journalist to go to a Jesuit university.
I don't know. I just went.
I can't think of anyone else in the country in working in Canadian journalism. Maybe Catholic school, but certainly not a Catholic university.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to do a survey. What I will say is, I went because I knew it would be hard. To be honest, I knew that there was going to be Latin and theology and Old Testament hermeneutics, as well as physics and reporting and, the sociology of journalism and the core requirement, cry yourself to sleep kind of stuff. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it being taught.
What did you get out of a Jesuit university that you couldn't have gotten out of a more secular role, especially considering you were a non-believer at this point? You were not devout.
No, I wasn't.
And you were very gay.
We keep coming back. I am.
Well, no, this is important because it's important for people to understand the cultural Venn diagram that's happening here.
It is in the Venn diagram. It is merely one of my circles.
But it's an important one considering the Catholic Church's position on homosexuality.
I know what you're saying. I don't self-perceived that way, which maybe says something about me too.
No, that's fair, but it's the Catholic case. So I'm in secular.
Liza, this is not part of my personal journey.
No, I get it, but I'm just saying, in secular society, society that's departed from the Catholic Church, there is a perception that the Catholic Church is highly homophobic, and so therefore it's interesting that you, someone who I think has always been quite open and honest about who and what you were from a pretty early age, would choose to go and pursue education, higher education, at a very rigorous, demanding, but very Catholic institution?
I guess I don't need everyone to love me. Like every aspect of who I am. Is it a Gen X thing? I don't know. Where I was just like, yeah, some people aren't going to like me. Okay. Or that institution isn't going to, celebrate and cheer and give me a balloon when I cross the finish line in fourth place. Like, I don't need that. I've never needed that in my life. Try growing up on a farm, coming out when you're 11, hooray. That was harder. At the university, it wasn't a problem. It wasn't like none of the Jesuits who were my professors, not one of them said anything that I would, it was like, here's what church teaching is. And some of them would go, yeah, this kind of crap, but here's what the church, but what it gave me, the Jesuit order is dedicated to education and learning, as well as some missionary work, but it really got in North America in particular, Georgetown, Loyola, like it's big, right, into education. And their standards were strict and hard, and I wanted that. I thought if you're gonna learn, by God, make it hard. If you want it to be easy, why bother doing it? So the core curriculum was brutal, right? Rhetoric, logic, things that don't necessarily get taught as part of a core curriculum. It doesn't mean you can't take it at, whatever, UCLA, Berkeley, but it may not be in the core when you're studying journalism, right? But it sure as hell was where I went to school. And I loved being forced to make an argument and then have a sort of crabby, belligerent Jesuit turn to me and go, now argue the counterpoint and convince me, I remember I actually got this as a serious grade from a Jesuit on a piece of journalism I wrote. I didn't get a grade. I got the words, "Good Christ, fix this," on my paper, right? And I'm like, oh, okay. So I enjoyed that experience. I actually considered becoming a Jesuit when I was there, entering into formation. I started to eat in their sort of like what was called Jesuit house and talk to them and spend a lot of time with them. Poor Father Bargan, I think, really wanted me to join up. It just never happened. I just found that, I couldn't do it if I lacked true faith. So it wasn't a path for me. But a lot of what they've given me, the introspection, the self-reflection, self-doubt. I once said to a very old Jesuit, he goes, what did the Jesuits teach you? I met him in Rome. He was in his 90s. And I said, I think they taught me how to think. And he went, oh, that can be very painful, can't it? Yes, it can. So anyway, enough of the school. Let's jump back to the CBC.
Yeah, okay. So you're back at the CBC. Yeah. You get a reputation as someone who's actually comfortable talking about the God stuff.
And then in 1999, CBC News World, as it was called then, wanted to start a show called Moral Divide. It was a show that was going to look at topical issues in the news, like hard news, but through a lens of spirituality and faith and philosophy. So I became first the associate producer and then later the program producer of that show. We only had 2 seasons, but by God, it was fun. And it sounds like a joke, right? Like I would get a rabbi from New York, a Jesuit priest, and an atheist philosopher from the University of Toronto to come into a conversation, and then we would debate something that was going on in the news. When after 9/11, it was we were all told that we should go out and shop because there wasn't enough shopping happening. So we actually did a show called "Are We Morally Obliged to Shop?" Right? Like we had fun with this, as well as taking on some pretty serious issues around that time.
That sounds really cool. Actually, that show sounds amazing.
God, it was fun.
Yeah.
God, it was fun because it was just like, where are we going to take it this week, right? And I loved being like, I've always enjoyed this. I like being the dumbest person at the table. And having these people, I remember once asking one of the rabbis, Rabbi, why should I think we were doing a show on bioethics. Rabbi, why should I listen to you? And he said, my people may not have the answer, but we've been asking this question for 5,000 years. Okay, that's what That was a turning point for me, right? Don't have the answer. Because today, everybody answer. What's the answer? What's the right answer? Here's the right answer. We all know what the right answer is. I loved when somebody said, we've just been asking the question. So anyway, in 2001, we learned that Pope John Paul II was going to come in 2002 for World Youth Day in Toronto. So the manager at CBC Calgary walked into the newsroom. I'll never forget. I was just doing my little job at my little desk, and he goes, do you want to work on when the Pope comes? Sure. So we were going to be the host broadcasters, the CBC, which means you're covering every second of every event for the world. We're the ones that were creating the video and sending it all out, both for the CBC, but for every broadcaster in the world that was going to cover this event. So they needed what was called a production book. And I was flown to Toronto, and I interviewed all the organizers of World Youth Day and the people that were in it, and actors and people doing the painting and the organizers and the police and the security personnel. And then I met a lot of Vatican officials who were over to do that. So I really sort of got involved with that. And then I was part of the CBC production for the actual event. So World Youth Day is where I really, I think, within journalism, started to sort of get a reputation as somebody who was interested in this stuff, and that could, talk to a Vatican official and not use the wrong word. And although I still do, there's so much, how could you ever not? And went through that event, which was amazing. And then, of course, in 2005, he died. And I was asked if I would come and be part of this funeral in the conclave. And so I did. Now, from when I started to work in 2001 all through until this morning, I have spent a little bit of time almost every day of my life reading up. Like, I could turn this camera and I have a wall of books dedicated to the history of the church. And not like how many angels can dance on the head of a pin kind of history, but institutional, organizational, geopolitical, the whole shebang. And I've tried to learn as much as I possibly can, which is, this much in a history that big. But I've really tried to, that's how I kind of stumbled into this, but then it's become part of my everyday life. Journalistically, right? Again, it's not. I was once asked on air if I was Catholic, and it caught me off guard. And I said, if faith is a destination, I am an X. The answer is no. But if faith is a journey, then probably. I'm fascinated by the notion of the transcendent, by something beyond my mere perception, something that goes beyond just how atoms rub together. And I have no way to define it, no delineation. I have no answers. I love asking the question, right? So that's how I got here.
That's a wonderful story. Okay, I got 2 questions for you, and then we're in our third segment, we're going to come back to geopolitics, because the combination of faith and geopolitics is catnip for the likes of us. But firstly, I want to talk about 2 things. One of them is, you made mention of this before about how if you are somebody who is open to conversations about faith, much less a full believer, and you work in secular media in a place like Canada, and I think in the United States as well, you are an anomaly. I think that I don't know what people's personal opinions on a lot of this stuff are when they go home. But when it comes to working in newsrooms, and this is not just the CBC, this is every newsroom that I've kind of been in to some extent, conversations about theology and faith aren't normal. They might be normal in the sense that, like, you might have a conversation about the ethics of abortion when abortion comes up in a news event. That would be a normal conversation. But if you were to come right out and say, well, I'm a true believing Catholic follower and I'm blah, 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 you'd kind of get weird eyes. The culture of secular newsrooms is very secular. It is atheistic, humanistic, I would say, is the prevailing ethos. Yeah. And I think that's so normal that it's, as David Foster Wallace would say, it's the water in which journalists swim. It's the water they don't see. It's the ethical sort of guidelines under which that underpin their sort of reporting and their way of looking at the world and being in the world are kind of unquestioned. And they're not based in traditional religious morality. And therefore, people who are traditional religious believers are seen as the other to most secular journalists. I think that's been my experience. Is that resonant with your experience? And if it is resonant with your experience, how do you think that affects the way that we cover the cultures that we're in, for good or for evil?
How long do we?
No pressure. No pressure.
I've worked in newsrooms in 6 countries, I think now, for different organizations. This is not specific to any particular news organization.
Absolutely not. That's very normal from my perspective as well.
Yeah. I don't understand the sociology of how we got here entirely, but if you were to tell somebody that you were a deep believer in a newsroom, in particular, if you were to tell them you were a deep believer and Christian, not just Catholic, but Christian, somehow that would make you, I think, slightly suspect for a lot of people, that you were perhaps morally deluded. Because it all comes back to what's a moral stance on whatever, right? And our modernity, in particular in the West, and even more so, I think, in North America, our modernity can be seen to be at odds with a lot of Christian doctrine. Okay, fine. Again, it's going to happen. So I think you're quite right. So what I think happens is that we get a lot of reporting where somehow it's Christian oppressor wishes to shut down obvious right of individual to do whatever. Or somebody, what I call somebody said something mean about me, religion, like journalism, and or we get the other thing, which is equally as god awful, I think, which is look at the amazing, colorful festival this particular minority religion in Canada put on, and I'm like, great, I'm glad you talked about the colors, but how about the theology? Like, what does this mean to people? So it's always to try to understand the belief in how it might influence somebody's decisions or the way they live their lives or how they vote or what they think about taxes, right? And if all we do when we cover is the pomp and circumstance, this sort of display of a ritual, I think that denigrates the notion of something that's deeply important. When I've got my sort of like, when I'm het up, aggressive to use your mark, with journalists, I want to say, you may not be religious, but 80% of the planet is, so you might want to make peace with that. And you don't have to love it, but by God, you might want to learn something about it so that you can understand how the world functions, right? Why would this particular country make that decision? Why would this particular group of people make this decision? And it's not just a Christian thing, right? And that's where we get blinded by our own history, because Christianity after colonialism was the dominant religion in North America, still is, I think. That we assume that that's religion, and I'm like, God, no, like, go talk to some Orthodox Jews, talk to somebody Hindu, like, learn something about why groups of people make these decisions. And there are a few proud fighting out there religious journalists, but fewer than when I started like 35 years ago. I do not consider myself a religious journalist by any means. I am a journalist. I am generic producer number 7 who likes to do, the Comic Expo parade and election shows. And, that's my bread and butter. But I want to remain open so that whatever the faith is, that I'm trying to figure out, and what does that mean, right? What does that mean?
This never really strikes me that, how should I say this? I think that the sort of default atheist secular humanism that pervades most sort of modern newsrooms nowadays has a real problem, because it really divides us from the majority of the people we cover, because the majority of the people we cover do have some religious affiliation or sense of belonging. Yeah. And I think it blinds us to cultural trends that are happening within religions. And those cultural trends inevitably become cultural trends. Sorry, those religious trends inevitably become cultural trends, and the cultural trends inevitably become political trends. So, I mean, one of the really clear examples of this, for example, is the way that, you know, a kind of American idolatry has absolutely taken over American evangelical churches. I talked about this on the podcast with Matt a few weeks ago, and again, one of the best books I've read on this has been Tim Alberta's book. He's a political reporter, but was raised in the evangelical church, and he talks about this in his book. It was called The Kingdom, the Glory, and the Power. Really, really great if you haven't checked it out. But he talks about this phenomenon, about how this kind of idolatry took over the evangelical church, and the political implications of that have been enormous. And it's one thing to look at the evangelical church and be like, you know, you religious loonies. It's another thing to get inside of that church and understand from their perspective why this particular way of thinking has taken over. What are the things feeding into it? What are the incentives feeding into it? And what's leading to the outcomes that we're getting, right? And I think that we have a tendency in secular journalism to otherize religious people. And that separates us from them and makes it harder for us to cover them in a really interesting and useful way, as opposed to just marginalizing or undermining them.
It completely. How do I say this? Journalism, I feel like I didn't change, but journalism has. I don't need everyone on Earth to align with the secular humanist values of one particular social policy or not. Like that's not my role as a journalist. Like, you know, honest to God, I don't even think it's my role as a thinking person. I have my beliefs. I try to discern my way through them. And then I try to discern why other people disagree with me. All right. And it's not like when you a secular humanist social theory becomes dominant, when a particular vision of the world becomes dominant, everyone else is a heretic. Now, we don't call it doctrine, but like there's some really good sociology out there that says that we've got a kind of doctrine going on in our society.
If it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a duck.
And that means everyone else is just damn wrong. They're a heretic. They have strayed from the true path. They are not part of the true faith. The true faith is obvious, right, to everyone. We all know that X should be the way things happen, and everyone else is just damn wrong. And so you just discount them. Well, here's part of the problem. If you discount everyone that has a different belief, whether it's religious or not, and you marginalize them, oh my God, the counter reaction. The anger that for being told that you're a heretic, that you are not of the chosen elect, right? You can distort, as I think we have, our society to a great measure. And I think whether you're a practicing Muslim or Jewish, if you come from the Hindu community, if you're Taoist, if you're Confucius, and your entire worldview is considered like a gentle form of mental illness, you cannot help but resent that, right? And that creates its own social conflicts.
And especially when that assumption is coming from people who, frankly, don't have the education to understand what you believe or why you believe it.
I think, we're real good in modern journalism at what, right? We're really bad at why. Like, here's what happened. Okay, here's what this person believes. All right. Why? Why do they? And again, I don't need a like, and this is the right way and this is the wrong way. If I needed that, I would be, let me see, a priest. Here's the one true way, right?
And yet the best priests I know are the ones who don't really do that either.
A little old Jesuit man changed my life in a church in Rome one day when I said, I don't have a priesthood. And he said, oh, no, you do. It is a priesthood of the word. Oh, boy, that just... When somebody else holds up a mirror to you and you go, I've never seen myself that way, that's what I'm interested in, is the word, everyone's word, and in trying to understand it, right? But
there's another deeper conversation about the difference between listening to a plurality of views and understanding that there are certain views that ought to be marginalized because they're fundamentally self-destructive. But I think that is a deeper conversation for another day, and one we probably need a few more drinks to have. But it's another tangent. But I mean, look, this problem never becomes more obvious to me than when I hear secular journalists talking about Catholic leaders in our country. We saw this start to happen again with Mark Carney. People who are on the sort of secular conservative side were just like, well, there's a giant double standard. Why aren't we giving shit to Carney for being Catholic? We know that the Catholic Church has wrong opinions on abortion. Okay, some take on that one, and that never kills me more because as someone who was also raised Catholic and is, I guess you would call culturally Catholic, I'm like, do you not have any grasp of how diverse actual opinions are on these complicated moral issues among the laity of the church? Like, have you, in case you hadn't been in a church lately, trust me, there ain't women with 14 children in the pews, regardless of what the latest pope says about contraception. Like there is a wide variety within Catholics. Firstly, there's a wide variety of Catholics, ranging from Easter and Christmas Catholics to fully devout, on-board trad cads. And everything in between. And among the laity especially, and I think even among the priesthood, there's a pretty wide variety of actual opinions about on contentious issues like abortion or same-sex marriage or any of these other issues as well. So to assume that just because someone's Catholic, that therefore you have a lock on what they personally believe on every contentious issue, to me that is just unwitting Catholic bigotry. And it's very, very ignorant of the reality of the church.
The way I deal with this, Jen, is if I hear somebody say something like this, I just say, please take out the word Catholic and put in the word Muslim. And if you find it offensive, then you may want to think about what you're saying. I know, like, flaming progressive, like on fire progressive Catholics, like just women should be priests and throw out the old thinking and just like, and then I have met people so conservative they want to bring back like liturgical gloves for priests and truly believe that things should be said in the Latin with the, you're back to the
bring down Vatican II.
Yeah, Vatican II, the church went all wrong, right? So there, in a church that numbers approximately 1.4 billion, to actually think that there won't be a difference between, well, let's put it this way, Catholicism in Germany does not look like Catholicism in Brazil. And I'm sure in different parts of Brazil, Catholicism looks different, and it will be different than Catholicism in Uruguay or in South Africa, right?
I'm willing to bet that Catholicism in Brazil is way more fun. If you're gonna pick a country to be Catholic in, Latin America is the way to go.
Yeah, I always said about Pope Francis. Yeah, he reminded me like of having an older grandfather that if you messed up would like in front of your mom, they'd be like, "Don't ever do that again," and then would like slip you a $5 when she turned her back. Like there's a cultural modality, and we can get back to that on the current Pope and his Americanness, but we're all derived not just by our religious faith, but we're all informed to some degree by the culture and the language in which we grew up, and that will be expressed differently. I wouldn't say all Muslims, because my experience in Malaysia was very different than my experience in Palestine, which was very different than my experience in Morocco. So, it's just ridiculous to make those kind of sweeping. I guess it makes people feel better, but I think when you have a hierarchical structure, it's easy to attack, right?
It goes back to, and this goes back to my own work in my own book about the idea that like Catholics are suspect because they have dual allegiances. If you're a Catholic, you have your allegiance to the nation and to Rome. JFK, so therefore, you're almost like. But I mean, you get basically watered down versions of that even today, right? That somehow there's something kind of suspect about Catholics because they have this allegiance to a universal church, and so therefore they're almost like dual citizens, right? This has been the basis of a lot of anti-Catholic bigotry for centuries now.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I mean, I know it. I know in the JFK years. I'm wondering if in the 21st century it's that, or the fact that it doesn't align with certain degrees of progressive values.
I think that's part of it as well, for sure.
Also, when you have an identifiable hierarchy, and not all religions do, right? When you have a highly public, highly identifiable hierarchy, that gives you a place to focus your anger. Well, it's those people, right? And I'm like, yeah, you may want to ask people who aren't Christian how they feel about, I don't know, drag queens in libraries, because I'm sure they have opinions too, right? So to say it's only this particular group, again, it's such a gross generalization where I just say, to be honest, I don't think it's worth engaging, because you haven't actually talked to enough people to figure this thing out.
One last question before we move on to the geopolitics side. Why? So for all of that preamble about secularity in media today, why is it that secular media eats the conclave up? They love it. They're here for it. Live stream on the chimney, like it's like the playoffs or the Super Bowl, like it's Catholic Super Bowl. What is it about this that a media that is not very engaged with the theology and largely regards the entire religion and its followers as suspect? Nonetheless, Pope's dead. We are there, man. Bang. Like, we're here.
Yeah.
Bang. Explain this to me.
Yeah, it's wow. And that gets asked. I can understand the frustration of people who are not of religious faith when they go, why? Like, there was a period there for about 3 weeks where I don't think you could turn your damn TV on without having to hear about it. And I'm sure it was just like, I'm up to here. I'm not part of this group. I don't care. I don't believe in this. I think they're misguided and wrong. Why? Right? I think there's a whole bunch of, like, I mean, one of the problems, unitary causation, right? Here's the thing that, makes it, I don't think that's it. I think it's a whole bunch of things going on. Not least of which, and I think you said it best, and I don't know if you meant to say it, the live streaming. We are now in a society ruled by the visual image. And even when we finally all got really cheap ways to watch video on this thing, right? Before it was expensive, but I've seen a change in the last 10 years where it's like, well, all the video I can stream, right? So I was actually saying during one of our broadcasts, you could be on a bus in like suburban Mississauga and watch the whole event. So I think visual spectacle, which has a lot of pomp and circumstance, is sort of, there's some really good French sociology that I barely understand, but I'm trying to, on how we become captured by the visual image. And because the possibility of the spectacle image exists, we not necessarily, but we gravitate subconsciously towards the amplification of those images. So I think it's, if okay, so one of the phrases that drove me crazy and I got into a throwdown with another journalist friend of mine from the States over this, was the notion of it's so secret and mysterious. No, it bloody, I have the damn book here in my library in Calgary. Who will stand where? Every single color, all the rituals, all the hymns, all the procedures, and all the processes. There was nothing mysterious. I mean, I guess if you think a secret ballot is mysterious, but that makes every election, that looks like referendum on a bylaw, mysterious. It's not. It's pomp and circumstance. It's liturgical formality. It's ritual. It's smoke. It's what is a zucchetta and how is it different than a mozzetto? And it's all this visual richness, right? In front of a hugely amazing building, and then inside a little room where Michelangelo did the decoration. How could you not be visually intrigued by that as a visual, like journalistically, as a broadcaster? I think it just, and then it's rare. It happens so rarely, right? you think of it, what you asked me in the beginning, how many conclaves? 3. In order to have done 4, like I would have been 9. And the one before that, I wasn't born, right? Like it's an event that does not happen very often. So I think that also adds to the allure, right?
There is something mysterious even about politics, though. Why humans behave in groups, why we behave in... Like, there is something that is beyond us there that is endlessly fascinating.
Well,
but on that note,
yeah,
I do want to put a pause in there. I do want to say like and subscribe. We are going on. I love it though.
Yakety yak yak yak.
No, but this is always our problem. But you know what? This is why we have On the Line, because we can yakety yak and people can stay with us or drop off however they want to. But for those people who do decide to stay with us, after the break, we are going to talk about the geopolitical implications. American Pope, Donald Trump, all the catnip, all that kind of stuff. So we're going to get into that. If you haven't already, do like and subscribe and check us out at www.readtheline.ca. Okay, and with that, David Perlich, I do want to talk geopolitics. Firstly, I mean, American reaction to the American Pope was interesting. There were many people who were very assured that this had something to do with Donald Trump, either because the guy was a Republican voter, although he had tweeted some things about Donald Trump that were negative, or perhaps he's a woke pope, or a non-woke pope, or a traditional Catholic pope, and all of this has to do with America somehow. David,
yeah,
what does Pope Leo have to do with America?
Other than he was raised there? So I think this is one of the problems that exists in Vatican journalism. And I've mentioned to you this too previously. The vast majority of English language reporting out of an analysis out of the Catholic Church, the Holy See, the Vatican, however you want to define it, is done by Americans. There's nothing wrong with that, but it does mean that they're writing for their audience under their sort of cultural vision with their geopolitical sort of divisions in line. You know, it's the way we heard, well, is this a progressive pope or a conservative pope? And I'm like, it's so much more complicated than that. It's more like a European thing where you have 15 parties in your parliament, each one of them a nuance that is different than the other. Here's my best guess. My best guess is this had absolutely nothing to do with the American geopolitical situation.
Impossible. Don't we know that America is the only country that exists?
I don't want to crap on America because I've lived there for 6 years of my life and I love the country, and it may be going through a bad patch. You'd be out of the spirit
of the mood of the country then if you refuse to crap on America right now.
I like my country, but I don't think it has anything. I think they made the decision based on somebody who could help unify a church that had been somewhat fractured under Pope Francis's papacy with some of his statements. I think the fact that this is an American, we are all, as I said earlier, a product to some degree of our culture. But here's something that we need to remember about this new Pope. Yes, he grew up in the United States, but he spent 30 years as a missionary in a different country and took a second citizenship. And he's been in Rome for years, learning, his Italian is spot on, and he understands how Italians, Romans, and the Romans, the curial government of the Vatican work. So he's a product of multiple cultures. I think it's great that we all want to root for the home team. Do you know what I mean? Local boy makes good. He used to live in a suburb of this city, and so and we like to sort of somehow it makes us feel more profoundly attached to our own nations if somebody from our country does something amazing, wins the Nobel Prize or becomes Pope. I will say this. I'm not sure if it was originally Stalin. Somebody said of the papacy, show me his legions. Where are his legions? Meaning his power, right? Well, Pope doesn't have legions and he doesn't need them. He has the world's biggest pulpit. If a pope talks about something, even people that hate religion will end up talking about that thing. So when Pope Francis made sort of an intervention, a very environmentally friendly, global climate change bad, we're stewards of the earth intervention, it was talked about during the Paris Accords. So I think one of the things that will be interesting to see if Pope Leo has enough standing globally to actually take on not only, say, an American leader, but I don't know, a Russian leader, who and to have enough moral authority to make statements that would impact people geopolitically, that could actually change perceptions, because you need to go up against somebody who's very, very powerful politically. You need to have some moral authority for people to listen to you or to invest your words with any kind of meaning. And I think that's where this gets interesting, is if a pope comes out for the environment, or a pope comes out against abortion or whatever, or a pope comes out about armed conflict in a part of the world, or comes out against the treatment of immigrants and refugees, they don't even need to name names. They just need to make a statement. And that will, we as journalists will rush in and put it in conflict against the, some leader. But that's how this works.
Right. It's an interesting question. I mean, you mentioned before that there were some divisions in the church after Pope Francis, or during Pope Francis' reign. Can you just give us a quick overview about where the church, what that divide is and what that looks like?
I gotta think how I want to frame this. It's like
the least diplomatically way possible.
Yeah, no, because that would be fun, right?
Yeah, it's more fun for me.
Dave thinks he knows so much, and he doesn't. One of my favorite moments with Pope Francis was an interview that I think he was doing with CBS Evening News, when I believe they were talking about LGBTQ issues. And amongst other things. And Francis was asked, who did he want in the church? And the interview was done in Spanish. And he said, in Spanish, todos, todos, todos. Everyone, everyone, everyone. And then he put in a line I thought was important. And then we'll figure it out. Right? I'd love everyone to be part of the church, no matter who, and then we will figure it out. That kind of framing of who should be in the church, what a Catholic would be, ruffled a lot of feathers for people who said, but that's not what a faith community is. A faith community is not everybody and then we'll figure it out later. It's, here's what we believe. If you believe it too, you are one of us.
That I think is a really valid point of tension.
Yep, it's again, I understood where some people went, whoa. There were a lot of concerns raised over the notion of blessing same-sex unions. Now, Francis didn't actually say the union itself. He said the individuals in the union. Now, that sounds like one of those nuanced points, but that's what I mean when I like this is complicated. That matters. That it wasn't blessing the union, which the church couldn't do according to doctrine, but blessing an individual who's of good heart and means well could be. But by raising that issue, and there was a fundamental misunderstanding on how his statement was first reported, which got the ire up of a lot of Catholic leadership in other parts of the world, who went, whoa, what's going on here? That the Vatican actually had to issue a clarification. And that's never good in an institution. He said I think it was his autobiography or in a book like the interview I read, that the last thing he wanted to do was have there to be unclarity in the church, right? And so I think the problem was that his greatest strength was his greatest weakness. His openness led to, for many, some misunderstanding and a lack of clarity. And that included for his supporters and for people that went, wait a minute, I don't like where you're taking my church. This isn't what I believe in or signed up for. So I think what they were looking for, and I think you could see that. So when Pope Leo came out on the balcony, and we were all there, and spun around, right? That what a life experience, right? And he comes out and he makes his Urbi et Orbi to the city and the world address. What he talked about was being a bridge builder. The first thing he talked about was being a bridge builder. I want to build bridges, right? And I wondered if that must be a statement on the church itself, and how he wanted to sort of settle down those internal discussions and division.
Is there a theological argument for being a universal church that welcomes everyone while at the same time maintaining a sense of identity and values that is distinct and separate from other faith groups? I mean, is that a possible thing to reconcile?
It's going to sound like a dodge, but honestly, you'd need a theologian. I don't know. There's a division division makes it sound more conflict oriented than it is, and that's not what I want to say. There is church teaching that is based on the sort of divine instruction that cannot be changed. Like this is doctrine. It must remain doctrine because it is based on gospel, and revealed word of God. And then there's sort of like, here's some stuff that we in the church made up as part of our canon law, or which is their legal system, and that can be changed. So this is like all good institutions.
It's a mess.
Okay, here's the problem. Institutions should be in conversation with themselves always.
Yes, true.
There should always be, I think, if you want to be a healthy institution, an internal conversation. Please note, I did not say an internal fight based on faction and division, but a conversation. I think that's what Francis's papacy 100 years from now will be remembered for, is that he tried to have what he called the synodal church, right? Which was a church that was in conversation with itself right down to the parish level. And he set that up as a mechanism, the synodal church. So it's going to be real hard for them to walk away from that. And Pope Leo has actually said he won't. I think he's going to put more guardrails around the conversation. I think there's going to be things where you go, nope, that part we're not talking about today because we're just going to get... But I think the problem with that is that can spiral a bit, right? That gets fuzzy, and a lot of people come to religion because they want truth. What is the revealed truth? What do I need to believe? What is true? That is a very human need, right? That is a very human need. I need truth. I need to be told what is right. What does justice look like? What does morality look like? So, sorry, this is not geopolitics, but it does inform geopolitics.
It does inform geopolitics.
Because our geopolitics is based on nothing but political party says, I will do X because this is the right thing to do, right? This is what justice looks like. And then popes have this global pulpit. They make a visit. Did John Paul II help bring down communism? Yes. Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Did he build, relationships with Thatcher and Reagan? You betcha. So you can have these substantive influences. It's not just about the bad old days of 1934, when your parish priest in Boston would come to the pulpit and say, y'all need to vote for this party, right? That isn't what we're talking about here. That world sort of doesn't exist anymore.
Well, it does exist in American evangelical Christianity.
But that's a different ballgame, right? And
that's a different ballgame, totally.
It may exist in other religious faiths. I don't know enough to know, but I'd sure like to know, right? But the fact that Pope Leo met with J.D. Vance this morning and the way that was presented, a collegial conversation about X, Y. You will know that there were things that were said in that meeting that touched on geopolitical issues, right? But anyone who's got some kind of wish fulfillment that thinks that Pope Leo is going to come out and sort of be like, Magna's on the right track, or come out with the opposite and go, this is nuts. What the hell are they all thinking? That's not how this stuff works, right? And again, we should, in geopolitics, I think one of the stupidest things we do is we look for simple solutions to complex problems. Mm-hmm. Well, we'll just do X and it's all sorted. That's not how this works. And the church, the Catholic Church has more of an approach that I think that you would say politically the Chinese government does, which is think in terms of decades and centuries, not in terms of what happens tomorrow and how will people react to it.
Fascinating. Well, anyway, David, I think that you have given our listeners a taste of what our drinking conversation is like in our normal life.
So smart. How long can they possibly go on? Yes.
Yeah. The answer is yes, and also much, much longer. I assure you, we can go on for some time. But I really enjoyed this conversation.
And this was fun. This was
so much fun. Thank you so much for coming on, and thank you so much for having a really, really fascinating conversation. For those of you who would like to, David, is there any place where people can reach you, find you, or are you hidden from all view from the public?
I'm kind of hidden away, to be honest. Just
okay. Well, I've dragged you from your library several days after you just got back from Rome. Well, you were tired. You did it as a favor to me. I appreciate it enormously. And on that note, do check us out at www.readtheline.ca and like and subscribe if you enjoyed this show. Thank you so much, David, for coming on. We really are endlessly appreciative.